what's the response to from your government, from the the Alberta Justice Minister, who's saying basically he's going to challenge the constitutionality and the jurisdiction of the federal government?
Well, so first, it's a pleasure to be here, Evan. The thing I just want to remind all listeners is that in May 2020, the federal government banned all assault-style weapons. We gave a 2-year amnesty to anyone who is legally owning assault-style weapons until we are able to put a buyback program put into place. And so that buyback program begins at the end of this year, and it extends until about October next year. So, as the minister in your initial clip indicated, the courts have consistently reminded everyone that firearms regulations is squarely in the jurisdiction of the federal government. And we know that the RCMP is there to enforce the laws, and they will be enforcing the laws, and we have confidence that they will do so.
Okay, well, they are, okay, thanks for that, Raquel Dancho. What do you make of the Alberta Justice Minister's challenge? He's got various avenues of challenge, or should he just accept the fact that he may not like it, and we can debate the merits of the gun buyback law, which I think deserves some debate, but what about the constitutionality of it? Is this squarely, in the Conservatives' view, in the purview of the federal government?
Well, first off, Evan, we're deeply concerned that the Liberal government is going to be redirecting RCMP officers from fighting crime and keeping our streets safe to confiscating lawfully owned property from Canadian citizens. It is reckless. It will contribute to making our streets less safe, and we do believe it's the completely wrong approach.
But do you believe it's... that's the merits of it. But what about the constitutionality of it? Is that still in the jurisdiction of the federal government?
We're certainly reviewing what Alberta is pursuing. They seem to be within their rights to pursue legal mechanisms to reinforce their position. We are certainly concerned at the federal level with the cause of gun violence in the first place and the failure of the Liberal government to address it. We've seen violent crime up 32% since 2015, since Prime Minister Trudeau first took office. And again, this plan will redirect RCMP officers from responding to 911 calls to confiscating lawfully owned property from Canadian citizens. It is the wrong approach, Evan, and it is reckless.
Okay, Julie, let me go back to you on that. Peter Julian can't hear us, so we've now, it's not like we're cutting Peter Julian out. Oh, maybe he can hear us. We've got a technical issue. Peter Julian, if you can hear us, what's your sense first on the legality? Does this fall, in your view, in the purview of the federal government? And so the RCMP ought to enforce it? And then is this an effective policy? Let's talk about the merits of it.
Well, first off, in areas of federal jurisdiction, federal law should apply. And you can imagine what kind of a country we would have if within federal jurisdiction it was defined differently everywhere in the country. How confusing that would be for all Canadians. So, yes, when there are laws that apply, they apply to all Canadians. There aren't exceptions, and this is why it's so important that when Parliament of Canada adopts legislation, that it's respected by folks right across the country.
Okay, Julie Durkowitz, let me go back to you. Let's just talk about the merits of this. Stats Canada, and I just read this, reports that basically just 2.8% of crimes are really dealing with some of the guns that you're talking about here, that handguns are really the key factors, especially smuggled-in handguns. I guess the question is, you may have the diagnosis right, but is the prognosis right? Do you have the wrong solution for the problem here?
So I probably should have mentioned this the first time around, but our assault-style weapons, they are guns that are used to kill. So they were used in the Quebec mosque killing, and they were also used in the United States in their latest mass killing, which is the Uvalde, Texas killing. So these are guns that no one should have. The only reason people would have them is they're killing machines. So we absolutely need to get them off our streets. I would also remind all listeners, Evan, that since we were elected in late 2015, we have made tackling gun violence and getting guns off our streets a key priority for us. We've passed C-71. We've put hundreds of millions of dollars to the border, to our CBSA, to ensure they have the technology and the resources to be able to ensure that guns don't come into our country. We've also spent hundreds of millions of dollars.
But I mean, my point is, but they are. So I mean, I know Raquel Dancho wants to jump in. They have done that. That's fair to say. And these guns, some of the, their contention is hunters and don't need a lot of these kind of guns. They don't need an AR-15, for example, they say. But what's your contention when you hear the Liberals say that?
Well, the fact is, Evan, that the Liberals' soft on crime policies for the past 7 years have contributed to some of the highest rates of gun violence that we've seen. We've also seen that they're going to be spending $5 billion on this buyback program, is the latest estimate, and yet they're only spending a fraction of that.
So what's soft on crime? What, not mandatory minimums? Is that what you're saying?
Well,
like
that's
what?
certainly one of them that they've contributed to. A few years ago, they also contributed to a bail reform that has seen a revolving door of criminals. That's contributing to a lot of the violence we're seeing on the streets. They talk a good game, and yet they don't actually deliver on any of the results. Again, violent crime's up 32% since 2015. Clearly, their approach is failing. We know the problem is gun violence, with gun violence, is gang and criminal activity in major urban centers that are smuggling guns across the border, and yet they're putting a fraction of the money to stopping the problem and billions of dollars to confiscate lawfully owned property from licensed, trained, and vetted lawful firearms owners. Okay. The approach isn't working.
Julian, what's your response to that?
Well, first off, I think we all agree that the federal Liberal government has not put the resources into stopping the flood of illegal guns from across the border. That is very true. I also remember the Harper government completely eliminating the crime prevention centers across the country that were absolutely fundamental in preventing crime. So the Conservatives, I think, should take a break from questioning anybody else, given how poor their track record was as well. We need to have federal laws respected. We need far more investments to stop the illegal guns from coming across the border. And I quite frankly think both Liberals and Conservatives have not the track record that they can be proud of, given how they have treated both in government.
But I guess from the NDP, like, there's not infinite resources. Just real quick, because the NDP, you've got this deal with the Liberals. There's not infinite resources. Should the resources that will go to this gun buyback program, you know, maybe there's some benefit there. Why not just switch those to stopping the flood of illegal guns and really focusing on that instead of diluting both?
Well, there seems to be unlimited resources when we talk about overseas tax havens. Both Liberals and Conservatives spend $25 billion a year in tax money that goes overseas, with no cracking down on that. There are a whole range of things, the bank bailouts that we can talk about in terms of where these two parties invest their resources. We believe that cracking down on illegal weapons is important, and there should be more resources devoted to it. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be investing in the buyback. It means that we can do both, but we have to be much smarter about federal finances, right. And neither Conservatives or Liberals have been, quite frankly.
Okay, Julie, let me just last question here. Can you just answer Raquel Dancho's point? If violent crime's up 35% in the last sort of 7, 8 years, is that an indictment of federal policies on this?
So first I would say, Evan, that the hundreds of millions of dollars that we have spent for additional resources at the border have absolutely worked, because we actually were able to stop a record number of guns from actually crossing our border last year. So that's one. It's important to indicate that the Conservatives actually cut funding to CBSA when they were in power. So that actually resulted in some of the guns actually coming into our country. So that's important to note. The other thing we've done is Minister Mendocino's also set up a cross-border task force to look at all additional ways for us to ensure that we maximize all of our efforts and our resources to ensure guns are not coming.
My question was, is the rise in violent crime an indictment on the fact you haven't done enough yet, and you ought to maybe do something more about it?
We absolutely always should be doing more. We are spending hundreds of millions of dollars at tackling the root causes of gun violence. Right now, we're in the middle. We have put a ban on handguns being sold in our country. So we are in the process of trying to pass C-21 through the House of Commons. We've passed C-71. There's a number of measures that we've put into place to make sure that our streets are safe, our cities are safe, and our country's safe. And we're going to continue to do more.
And yet the gun violence is up, Julie, across the country. It's never been worse in this country. Since your government has been in power since 2015, the streets are less safe. And your resource spending on lawful, vetted, licensed, and trained firearms owners far exceeds the money you're putting into the border and preventative measures to prevent crime from happening. Your approach has failed.